Edwards. Karriem Edwards is a researcher, he's a scholar, he's a teacher, he was a teacher of the year, and a whole lot of other things, but he's always kept youth at the forefront. Karriem, let's bump first. Bam, and put it right there, Karriem. Welcome to the show, Karriem.
Thank you for having me, Lee.
Why, with all of this, well, let's go back to Youth of the Year, Teacher of the Year. And I've seen you get other awards, but Teacher of the Year, I think that, to me, is something to behold. Now, tell us, where did you get Teacher of the Year, and how did that come about?
I accepted Teacher of the Year on behalf of some dropout prevention students at Whitten Rogers Education Center in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Okay.
And I was inspired every day by every one of those kids that came through that school who were supposed to be headed to dropping out of school, but they inspired me, and somehow I ended up with the award.
What inspires you most about the Lillian Lambert story? I saw you over there just shaking your head, because I know I got a chance to meet her as a result of you.
Everything.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, man, something particular.
Today is like Christmas for me. For someone who researches and understands the significance of history, and also sharing history with the following and successive generations, meeting Lillian Lincoln Lambert is like opening up a Christmas gift. And I tell her, every time I get an email from her, it's like Christmas morning.
How does Howard Fitzhugh tie into Lillian Lambert?
It's a direct relationship. Howard Naylor Fitzhugh was a normal guy who did above average things. Mm-hmm. One of the things that he did is he mentored and nurtured a young lady who had no plans on going to college, and she ends up becoming the first African-American woman to graduate from Harvard Business School. That woman is Lillian Lincoln Lambert.
Right.
The funny thing is she was not alone. There were hundreds and thousands of individuals whose lives he touched through his life. And then there's some, like myself, who he touched after he was even passed on.
Okay, let's take a look at a picture of him, Rick, if you don't mind. Let's put some pictures up of him. How did you become familiar with him, and then what made you, we heard some things, but what just drew you in there?
Yeah, the first thing, when I first became acquainted with the thought of Howard Naylor Fitzhugh, a good friend of mine, Edward Bryant, was in Harvard Business School. My wife and I went up to visit, actually to plan our wedding. And during the time, Ed said, let's go work out. I had traveled to Boston from Florida in the middle of the winter with no winter clothes.
You always going everywhere, researching stuff, but go ahead.
Well, Ed gave me this shirt, and it said Howard Naylor Fitzhugh Conference. And I was like, who is Howard Naylor Fitzhugh? And he said, he's the first African-American to graduate from Harvard Business School. And I said, that's not right, because in Atlanta, the gentleman who had founded Atlanta Life, his son was the first African-American to graduate from Harvard Business School. It turned out that we were both wrong, but it began a relationship with Howard Naylor Fitzhugh that has lasted longer than my marriage.
Let's talk about, in a brief way, Howard Business School. I mean, we hit on it with Lillian Lambert, but the prestige and the whole process of having an African-American during that time period to graduate from that business school, let our audience understand the significance of that and how difficult that is to have accomplished.
Well, it was difficult for Naylor Fitzhugh and other African Americans at Harvard throughout Harvard's history. There have been numerous challenges, but in 1933, Naylor Fitzhugh had gone to Harvard College and then on to Harvard University, where he was in the class of 1933. This was in the heart of segregation. This was before '65. This was before Brown versus Board of Education. So there was a lot of things, racial tension and things of that nature going on socially. So they had to deal with that, yet they still managed to achieve academically. And what is even more important is that what they did after they graduated. They didn't go out and, as you say, go out and try to make their fortune. They went back to the community. Within months of graduating from Harvard Business School, Naylor Fitzhugh was demonstrating on behalf of black employees at Hughes Ice Cream Shop in Washington, D.C. These were part-time employees looking for rights.
What do we do now, or do you see that as you work with youth and you work with young teenagers and young adults? Is that passion there? Do we see that next generation who will be the Lillian Lamberts and the Fitzhughs of the world?
I think we see the passion in the youth, what's lacking is the successful individuals. There is this obligation that we have to go back several generations and several levels of society to not just nurture and teach, but also encourage young people. If you look at Naylor Fitzhugh, that's what he did. That's how we ended up with the Lillian Lincoln Lambert. If you look at even today, most recently I had a gentleman who's the Executive Vice President of Major League Baseball. He came into my Boys and Girls Club and spent quality time with our kids.
Go ahead.
That impact inspires youth to not only want to achieve, but it also gives them confidence. It builds their self-esteem and gives them courage to go on for the next day.
Now, these people that we just spoke about, they're African Americans.
Yes.
But does this story, or this kind of thing, only applies to the African American community?
No. Here we are in Fort Myers. Right down the street, we have the Edison Ford home. The reason those two homes are together is because a young, self-educated engineer by the name of Henry Ford, whose mother died when he was young and all of these things, he was at a conference and he ran into a gentleman by the name of Thomas Edison. And he was telling him about this thing that didn't make any sense to Thomas Edison, but Thomas Edison said, "You go ahead, young man, you're on to something." Well, it ended up that Henry Ford became relatively successful, and he always, until his death, admired Thomas Edison, and they had a lifelong relationship.
Now, you as a researcher, a person who walks around with all of this in your head and espousing this history, why is it so important that we have people like yourself to continue to read this history, document this history, and carry it on into the next century?
Well, if you think of any dynasty, any pipeline of success, the #1 quality is understanding the stories of success, passing those stories on so that they would inspire others. Understanding that a Thomas Edison, who was kicked out of school when he was 3 years old, he didn't have to deal with racism, but he had to deal with educational issues and things like that, became one of the most prolific inventors in the history of the United States, one of the most successful businessmen. His company became General Electric, which is one of the largest companies on the face of the earth. So it's important that we take the stories, share them, use them to inspire the next generation.
Final question. You and I both work in the Boys and Girls Club, Broward County. You're a unit director. I see when I move around in your unit, all of these books for kids to read, be inspired by. You're always trying to expose kids to other things. Why is that exposure and reading so important for our generation, this generation of youth?
Because if you can read, then you can learn. Simple as that.
Karriem Edwards, ladies and gentlemen. Karriem, thanks again. We're going to bump this out, man. As the saying goes on this particular show, for those who say it can't be done, they're usually interrupted by those like Karriem and all the great people who have come before him and will come after him who are doing it. We'll see you next week right here on the award-winning Leap This Live. So stay.